Let's dive into today's top story, shall we? And let's talk about Vladimir Putin versus the World Economic Forum. So there's a conference happening right now in Moscow, the Moscow conference, where President Putin spoke just this morning. And he had a couple of things to say about the World Economic Forum, among other things, didn't he?
Yes, he did. He also accused most of the West of provoking China. And he talked about this sort of war complex that, interestingly enough, is something that we talk about a lot on this show.
By the way, we should mention that zero coverage of this will be on CNN. Like, if you see this speech by Vladimir Putin on CNN, I will fall over. I will fall over. Because, no, they're wall-to-wall coverage right now on President Trump, of course, right? Or if you see this on the BBC, I would be shocked. If you see this on any of the mainstream media, I would be stunned. So, again, basically Vladimir Putin destroying the World Economic Forum and the unipolar order, instead saying flat out, countries need to be sovereign. People need to have their own individual identities. Take a listen to, with subtitles here, what Vladimir Putin had to say at the Moscow conference.
Ситуация на Украине показывает, что США пытаются затянуть этот конфликт. И точно так же они действуют, разжигая конфликтный потенциал в Азии, Африке, Латинской Америке. Как известно, недавно США в очередной раз сознательно попытались подлить масло в огонь и раскачать ситуацию в Азиатско-Тихоокеанском регионе. Американская авантюра в отношении Тайваня – это не просто поездка отдельного безответственного политика, а часть целенаправленной, сознательной стратегии США по дестабилизации и хаотизации обстановки в регионе и мире. Наглая демонстрация неуважения к суверенитету других стран и к своим международным обязательствам. Видим в этом тщательно спланированную провокацию. Очевидно, что с помощью подобных действий западные глобалистские элиты, в том числе, пытаются отвлечь внимание своих собственных граждан от острых социально-экономических проблем. Падения уровня жизни, безработицы, бедности, деиндустриализации. Переложить собственные провалы на другие страны, на Россию, на Китай, которые отстаивают свою точку зрения. Строят суверенную политику развития, не подчиняясь диктату наднациональных элит.
So a couple of things stand out there. He mentioned Nancy Pelosi and specifically called her irresponsible and rude. He said it is not, this visit to Taiwan was not just one irresponsible politician. It was altogether a rude gesture.
And a strategy. A targeted strategy.
Yes.
And again, why then does the Senate delegation fly? And by the way, this afternoon, China ramping up all sorts of military exercises as we speak, literally right now, thanks to this latest Senate delegation flying into Taiwan. Targeted strategy to provoke China. That's exactly what's happening. And the fact that you even have Henry Kissinger, war criminal, warmonger, saying the exact same thing. So they're on the same page. Who would ever have thought that Vladimir Putin and Henry Kissinger would be on the same page?
Right.
But I mean, he talks about this hegemony, right? This unipolar idea, which is this globalist identity, which is this idea that Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum and all of these unelected billionaires and some elected have come together and are trying to direct power under one, I don't know what's the best way to describe this, unelected body. And they're going to tell countries how to live. So you might have grown soybeans for generations in your country. Well, we're done with you growing soybeans. We're going to tell you now, because of this new world order, that you're not growing soybeans anymore. You're part of the unimind, the unipolar order. So now you're going to be just growing coffee. That's it. It doesn't matter how your economy will suffer. It doesn't matter what land we will take away from you, like we're doing to the farmers in the Netherlands and all across in Canada and all across the world right now. We're going to consolidate power and we're going to run the show. And that's exactly what Vladimir Putin was condemning and targeting and saying this is not going to happen as we align our BRICS nations. He talked also about unifying and creating a new gold standard away from the World Economic Forum standard, which is a corrupt standard of measuring gold, saying, look, now that the BRICS nations are moving towards a commodity-based, gold-based standard for our currency, we're not going to use your corrupt way of measuring gold anymore. We're going to do it our way, where we're actually going to measure it authentically so that these economies can run properly.
Right, and you can see just clearly these lines of unity being drawn across the globe, right? So with these types of words and these types of actions, sure, the United States might be able to expand NATO to a few small European nations, but it will solidify the BRICS nations, which is even more dangerous, a formidable of an enemy.
Now, before we get to, I just want to kind of paint a picture here about the World Economic Forum piece of this, because, and I want to get to Klaus Schwab in a second, because Western journalists, and I see it sometimes in our chat from people who will kind of say, well, they're all a part of the WEF. Putin is a part of the WEF as well. And that's just flat out wrong. And Western journalists and Western media will try to portray it that way. Mm-hmm. And in fact, journalists who understand this and who have been covering it for a long time understand that that's absolutely not the case. Yes, he couldn't be invited to speak, which we'll get to in a moment, but that doesn't mean he's a part of it. In fact, it's the exact opposite. But something interesting happened just nearby where he was speaking. So he was speaking at the Moscow conference, and I thought that this was a fascinating piece of news, because the conference was just across the street or nearby, was showing off at this military conference, showing off weapons, the Russian military. And so if you walk through the hall at this conference, nearby where President Putin was speaking, two separate conferences, what do you see here? Those are U.S. weapons. Those are U.S. weapons that are both captured and bought on the black market. And they're being featured at this weapons conference. And basically, according to the people who were there, saying they're being shown off as an example of what not to buy and what not to use, because they've either been captured or they've been destroyed on the field of battle. See that American flag?
Oh,
that's an American howitzer. And there's also M77.
Can I just ask an ignorant question, though? Like,
Okay.
It is possible that someone could have just painted that on a, right?
No, it's not. I mean, these are American weapons. These are not made by Russia. So, I mean, according to the sources who were there looking at these weapons, unless Russia has manufactured their own version of these,
Yeah.
with fabricated serial numbers and others, some of the other ones were actually destroyed. We can put these up on the screen. The U.S. howitzer was bought because it was in perfect condition, and the journalist who was covering this believes that it was bought on the black market, because a lot of the weapons obviously going to Ukraine
don't make it to the battlefield.
Don't make it to the battlefield. So they're there on the battlefield. I mean, if you just walk through this conference to see American weapons on display in Russia, and what they're telling you is, and if you listen to the military operators there, what they're saying is these weapons were built for an asymmetrical war.
What does that mean? That
means that the United States has been going up against guys on camels, basically, who are not fighting back. And these weapons are made to, a lot of the weapons that the United States works with Boeing and Raytheon and all of these companies, they're meant to need servicing on an absolute regular basis, because it's all a huge money grab.
Right.
So if you walk through this conference, and what the military, these contractors are saying is, here's better equipment that is now field tested in Ukraine. And they're showing off Russian weapons against Ukrainian Azov battalion and others that to great success in a short amount of time. Isn't that crazy? I mean, it's just, to me,
boy, that feels really good to
know that
pay
your
taxes.
tax dollars, your tax dollars going to those things. I just found that absolutely fascinating.
And if they're ending up in the hands of those people, it's like, who else do they end up in the hands of? Like, if they're not tracking any of this, it could end up in, I'm kind of against the war on drugs or whatever, but it could end up in the drug dealers' hands, and they could be using this to, do things to their enemies. Like, these are serious weapons that are obviously being sold on the black market to whoever's got the money.
Yeah, I mean, look, Marty in our chat says Afghanistan sold weapons in the black market. Of course, this is how they're making money. This is exactly the problem in Syria. We've covered it here on the show, right? Al-Qaeda, we have been funding Al-Qaeda for years in Syria, right? And you can just ask great journalists, Kevork Almassian, Vanessa Beeley, who's in Damascus, who we've interviewed here on the show. Read fantastic reporting at the Gray Zone. You can go through these details. You can see, in fact, even the New York Times acknowledged this, that we are funneling money to Al-Qaeda by them basically, here's our weapons, you sell them and you fund yourself. We're going to use you in our proxy war in Syria against Assad. This is how it works. I'm just stunned by this. Like he's giving a speech about this unipolar order, and they're showing off American weapons that have been bought on the black market and destroyed by Russia. So again, just come back to this thought. Why American weapons on the field of Ukraine destroyed by Russian forces, NATO forces, and here they are being shown off as clunkers, basically.
Well, as we move on to something that Putin said, it sort of makes sense how Western forces make so much money off of funding wars that are not in and around their backyard, right? So Putin later pointed to the AUKUS, I'm not sure if that's how we're saying it, AUKUS package. It's a pact that was established last fall in September of 2021 that the U.S. aims to build. Putin is saying that with this pact, the U.S. is aiming to build a NATO region in Asia. Now, AUKUS stands for Australia, the UK, and the U.S. So it's a pact between those three nations, and it does very much seem like a Asian Pacific NATO. When it was announced last September, the White House called it that it was.
Let's put this up on the screen.
Yes, please. That it was around to deepen diplomatic security and defense cooperation in the Indo-Pacific region, including by working with partners to meet the challenges of the 21st century. And as part of this effort, we are announcing the creation of an enhanced trilateral security partnership called AUKUS, Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States.
Someone in our chat says, Rockout Blackout says, I didn't know the UK was in the Pacific. Hey, is the United States in the Pacific?
Right.
It doesn't matter.
Well,
right?
You're going to see
everywhere we want to be.
Exactly why they care, right? So further explanation of what they are. They say, we endeavor with the launch today to sustain peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific region, which for more than 70 years, it says Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States have worked together, along with important allied partners, to protect our shared values and promote security and prosperity. Now, they don't specifically mention China, but they do sort of say we need to protect ourselves from sort of influence in this region. So when AUKUS was established, what was its first order of business? Well, you can see that they wanted to provide submarines to Australia.
Nuclear submarines.
Conventionally armed and nuclear powered submarines with the capability at the earliest possible date while upholding the non-proliferation standards, because Australia is a non-prolific or non-nuclear country, but Australia was willing to host these nuclear submarines, right? This is why they did not go to New Zealand, because New Zealand also is non-prolific. Now, as you can imagine, China dislikes AUKUS too. So this was something that Putin called out yesterday, saying this is clearly their attempt to establish NATO in this region. We're not going to stand for it. And they're telling us what they're doing. We should believe them, right? So when this was announced last year, of course, China didn't like it. They called it a Cold War mentality. And it was also just kind of a dickish business move, because Australia, before this pact, had a pact with France to buy submarines. But they canceled this deal once the U.S. came along and said, buy from us instead. And the French ambassador in Australia was recalled after this move because France was so upset about it. This is from the BBC. It says the pact also created a row. I think you're supposed to say this word, a row.
A row.
If you're British.
If you're British.
It created a row with France, which means like a tiff, which now has lost a deal with Australia to build these 12 submarines. And the French foreign minister said it's really a stab in the back. So you can see that the United States has no problem moving into areas where they can establish these sort of peace conventions or peace pacts, right? If there is an opportunity to sell something like a nuclear submarine, which is exactly what is happening. So when President Putin called this out yesterday, it's incumbent on the rest of us to pay attention and realize, what is this? We're doing that? I didn't know we were doing that.
Well,
yeah.
It also it baffles me. So it's like we've talked about this a lot on this show, how they don't track these weapons, and it feels like that's by design, because the more weapons they lose, the more weapons that end up where they can't track it, the more they're going to be like, oh, we need more weapons because we're trying to get them to Ukraine. And it also gives them a propaganda story because they can be like, oh, this country stole them, or these ISIS stole them, or whatever. So because you're talking about weapons, they track food better than they do weapons in grocery stores. So
no, this is all part of the plan. It is all part of the plan.
Yeah, it has to be.
Because, and this is exactly how the weapons manufacturers want it. They don't care. In fact, we played for you on this show the sounds of a number of CEOs. I forget, was it the...
I think it was the Raytheon CEO saying, well, a lot of those weapons are not going to make it there, so that's good for us.
It's good for us.
We'll keep it. It's going to be a banner year, everybody.
And when I talk about these weapons, the ones that they're showing off at this weapons conference, they're designed to be like disposable. They're designed for an asymmetrical warfare, right? They're designed to go up against guys on camels and horseback. And even there, we didn't do... I mean, think about 20-year war in Afghanistan at the end of the day. And what did we get for it? We know how that ended, right? So now you're up against a real army. And as we've talked about before on the show, we've had anyone from Larry Johnson to Scott Ritter, a number of different military experts on our show. I've spoken separately to members of NATO who've said, we are not prepared. Like, they will wipe us off the map with the types of weapons that they have compared to what we're using right now. Just look at the hypersonics that China has. So we're going to put aircraft carriers in the South China Sea? Goodbye. Like, we are not prepared for this. We are prepared for an asymmetrical war where these are replaceable and we keep funneling money to these weapons contractors. So you might sit back and say, no, we're the biggest army in the world. No, we spend the most on it. Does that actually mean that we are prepared for a land war against Russia and China, or an invasionary force? Are you absolutely out of your mind?
Also, literally, China can turn your life off. Like right now, they can just reach in to your life and turn off your bank account. They can turn off your car. They can turn off your heater. They can turn, like, literally, they have some of the best hackers in the world. And so this war, right, will not stay on the battlefield. It is something that could affect us all. They can hack the elevator that you ride up to your office every day. They can have, like, literally everything. So it will not only be a war on the ground, it will be a cyber war. So it's not something that you can think like, oh, well, because war for so many people is put so far away from them. It's usually the lower, the middle class doesn't, the middle and wealthier nations, they don't send their kids to war. So they don't suffer the sort of personal impact of it. And so, you can sort of put it aside like, well, yeah, some people will die. It won't affect my life. It will, right? And that's an awful way to feel. Although the economics of it now allow so many people this insulated safety net, and it's false. None of us are safe if this happens.
No, I mean, we are, again, on this show, we are vehemently anti-war. And, we have been pushing for peace from the very beginning. And interesting piece that came out today that was in the Marine Corps Gazette. So Moon of Alabama did a great job sort of dissecting this Marine Corps Gazette, I don't want to say like thesis or treatise of what happened, but this is spot on. So a lot of people in Western journalism were saying, Russia moved in and moved forces into Kiev, right? But they were also on the eastern side of Ukraine. So why were they coming towards Kiev, right? Why were they doing that? And then, of course, they suddenly disappeared, right? And we heard the bullshit stories about the ghost of Kiev, right? And they're repelling it. Ukraine is pushing them back, pushing them out of there. And Western media, CNN, others were all saying, see, this is an example. Ukraine is winning this war. They're pushing them out of Kiev. Well, now, according to a Marine who's writing about this at the Marine Corps Gazette, says that this was all part of the plan. It was a feint. It was a feint, meaning it was a fake move by the Russian army to move into Kiev and fake that they were going to invade Kiev, the capital, right? And instead, they used that to draw 100,000 forces from Ukraine towards that area. And what did they do while they were over there? They moved into eastern Ukraine and took all of the Donbass and Donetsk and all of that area that was under bombardment for the last 8 years, which is exactly, by the way, what Putin said was going to happen and what they laid out. And, again, straightforward. So this is a Marine writing this. But then Moon of Alabama does a great job. It's like must read. It's part of my daily reading at Moon of Alabama. Does a great job. And he says, Lambert Strather and Yves Smith at Naked Capitalism discuss a piece on the Russian operation in Ukraine that had been printed in the Marine Corps Gazette, all of which is a facsimile pictures, blah, blah, blah. And he said, I read the Gazette piece when it first appeared some weeks ago and found it excellent. It realistically depicts the early Russian move towards Kiev as a feint. This is also my view, he says. The feint, with too few troops to actually occupy Kiev, had a political and military purpose. Politically, it put pressure on the Ukrainian government to quickly agree to a Russian condition for a ceasefire. This nearly worked. This is an amazing piece of the story. This nearly worked. Why didn't it work? It didn't work because the UK sent Boris Johnson to make it not work and to talk down a peace agreement.
Well, he says here, speaking for Joe Biden, right?
Right.
So, like,
Boris was speaking for Joe Biden.
Hand in hand, the two Western leaders are saying, yeah, we see that you've been going to Turkey and talking about a ceasefire. Don't do that. We're going to continue to support you, until you actually take your country back altogether, which was always going to be fiction.
Militarily, he says, the feint had near perfect results. 100,000 Ukrainian troops mixed around Kiev, while Russian troops from Crimea moved nearly unopposed to the island via a land bridge to the Donbass, and Russia also grabbed a large foothold in Kherson and the west side of Dnieper. The hasty feint had a high price in the form of Russian casualties, but actually helped to establish front situations in the east and south that allowed for the mass destruction of Ukrainian forces with a minimum of casualties on the Russian side. So again, a move that basically was forcing Zelensky's hand towards peace until NATO gets involved and says, don't do it. We want this to be a forever war, and we want to use Ukraine as a proxy war battleground for the next 20 years, an endless Cold War.
I think that sort of makes sense when you think back to these. For instance, last month, the Wall Street Journal did a whole feature piece about how nightlife in Kiev is back. People are going to coffee shops again. It's as if like the war raged through there and now everyone's good again. Like, Russia kind of blew through and that was it. Well, if you look at this reporting and this sort of military strategy, it's like they never really were there. So this idea that the Ukrainians were victorious and have their city back is it's a false notion.
Right. But Western media jumped all over it, right? Western media was all like, look, this is, again, this is Ukraine winning. They're winning the hearts and minds, and they're repelling Russian forces. They forced them out. They forced them out of Kiev. So I think that this assessment by this U.S. Marine in this writing at the Gazette and the analysis by Moon of Alabama is spot on. And this actually is an alignment from what we've heard separately here on this show, from military sources we've had here on this show. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about this in the comments below. Let us know. But again, right now at this hour, just to kind of wrap this up, China ramping up military exercises again in Taiwan. Mm-hmm. Russia aligning itself, saying we're going to be handing out weapons to like-minded allies, both North Korea, Iran, and otherwise. And we're trying to solidify the currency around BRICS gold standard, and away from this Western orthodoxy about how they measure gold. And we're also not going to fall in line with your unipolar order.
And validating their buds over in China, saying, yeah, we think what the United States is doing with Taiwan is bullshit. We're on your side, right? And so, it's interesting when someone says, we see your feelings are hurt. We agree with you, right? So now we know where the loyalties lie.